There's nothing more exhilarating than pointing out the shortcomings of others, is there?
This video was made possible due to those who support me on Patreon. I'd like to give a big shout out to patrons Conrad Truitt, Dan Ray, Flake, Joseph Abrams, Kyle Kramer, Logan Cottingham, Mariah, Patrick Smith, and Stephen Dillon. Thank you all for your support. For those of you who are frequent visitors of my channel, you probably know that I am not the biggest fan of The Sopranos.
Are you gonna get cute with me?
But nonetheless, I was intrigued upon hearing that the series would be receiving a prequel film, developed by series creator David Chase himself. Thus, I waited with anticipation to bear witness to what would be perhaps the final chapter in the saga of The Sopranos. But sadly, the film is a hot mess. This is not something I take joy in expressing. It honestly took me some time to come to grips with the fact that I consider the film to be an unfocused clusterfuck, but, well...
What are you gonna do?
Upon the film's announcement, many were skeptical that it would simply be a lackluster attempt to capitalize on the legacy of its predecessor, which, let's be honest, is what the vast majority of prequels are. Many questioned whether or not a prequel was even necessary. However, I would argue that a prequel could be a worthy addition to the franchise, as I always felt there was a piece of the tale that was missing. Throughout the series, we get more and more insight into Tony's upbringing, and how there was a time when he actually had aspirations beyond the mob life. And thus, this begs the question, where did he go wrong? What resulted in Tony deciding to forego his alternative prospects and fall into a life of crime? There really isn't an explicit answer given in the series, and we're led to just assume it was simply as a result of him being exposed to the culture. But when the first trailer for The Many Saints of Newark was released, it seemed to offer a possible explanation: his relationship with Dickie Moltisanti. Despite only being mentioned a few times throughout the series, Dickie's influence on Tony is quite significant, as he is shown to consider the man a bona fide legend, and thus, it seems the film would delve into their relationship, which in turn would give insight into what led Tony to decide on his eventual path. But while the film sort of explores this, it was more or less relegated to a footnote, despite promotional material making it appear as if this would be the main focus of the film. Leading up to the film's release, Chase stated he was interested in making a film about the Newark race riots of 1967, and eventually decided to meld the topic with the Sopranos universe. Again, many voiced their skepticism, as they feared it would end up being a completely unrelated story with a few Sopranos references thrown in to make it marketable. The film is set against the backdrop of the riots, but it doesn't dwell on this period, rather using it to establish the relationship and later conflict between Dickie and his associate, a brand new character by the name of Harold McBayer. I do want to give the film credit for actually taking a risk. The film could have just been a whole heap of fan service, and it probably would have appeased many fans, so I appreciate it deciding to tell a wholly original story. The problem is that Chase never seemed to really settle on what story he wanted to tell. It seems as if the fatal flaw of the film was that it was trying to be two films at once. One film chronicling Dickie dealing with the escalating threat that Harold poses to the DeMeo crime family, the other his attempt to prevent Tony from falling down a dark path. Following murdering his own father for abusing his new wife Jessepina, Dickie desires to do a good deed to redeem himself, which comes in the form of keeping Tony from a life of crime. Thematically, the idea of Dickie seeking redemption via keeping Tony on the straight and narrow is interesting, as it echoes Tony's desire to turn over a new leaf in the final season of the series. It is even shown that Dickie was a coach for a beat baseball league, echoing another major thematic element of the show. But unfortunately, the relationship between Dickie and Tony, again, despite being framed as the main focus of the film via promotional material, isn't all that well developed. After Tony's father Johnny is sent to prison, the implication is that Dickie takes over as Tony's father figure. But Dickie already seemed pretty close with Tony before this, and we don't really see how their dynamic changes while Johnny is in jail. I assumed that after the several-year time jump, when Johnny is released from prison, that this would cause tension between Dickie and Tony, or maybe even Dickie and Johnny, as perhaps Johnny is threatened by Dickie acting like a father to Tony. But no, this is never explored at all. Not only that, but the entire idea of Dickie trying to steer Tony from the mob life is contradicted within the film itself. There is a solid scene where Dickie chews Tony out for acting up after Johnny is sent to jail, but then later, Dickie gives the teenage Tony stolen speakers? Tony even says he shouldn't take it because he wants to go to college, and yet Dickie insists. Like, wasn't Dickie trying to keep Tony from a life of crime? Also, it seems part of what resulted in Dickie taking a father figure role over Tony was due to the fact that his wife Joanne can't get pregnant, and that he has always wanted a son. But then Christopher is born, and it's like, was this an editing mistake? So on one hand, you have Dickie trying to keep Tony from a life of crime, and on the other, you have the DeMeo family being threatened by Harold interfering with their business, which results in a pretty solid, if a tad standard, mob warfare tale. In and of itself, I thought this was an interesting concept set against the backdrop of the civil rights movement. How Dickie is far more friendly towards Harold compared to his fellow family members, yet he is inevitably the one who is forced to face Harold head on. Again, it's fine, but since these two disparate plot threads don't really factor in with each other and seem to be trying to share the space of a single film, it results in quite the uneven experience. Now, with that said, I think I kind of see what the film was trying to do with these two plots. While Dickie has aspirations to be a better man, particularly by way of being a mentor to Tony, Harold's antagonizing of the DeMeo family leads to Dickie backsliding, exacerbating his violent tendencies, eventually leading to the murder of Giuseppina, after she reveals that she had an affair with Harold. Following her death, Dickie confides in his uncle, who tells Dickie to stay out of Tony's life. Dickie then cuts ties with Tony, which ironically only results in Tony lashing out. I like this idea in concept, the tragic irony of Dickie alienating Tony only resulting in Tony being more at risk of falling into a life of crime, which is amplified considering how the relationship between Tony and Dickie's son Christopher ends in the series. And the idea of forward personal progress being hindered by the complications of mob life is obviously a massive theme of the original series. The only issue is that despite me being able to sort of see how these two plots mesh, neither is given a satisfactory resolution. The last we see of Harold is him speaking with an associate about his plan to take out Dickie, which I suppose is meant to build tension, as we know Dickie obviously is going to eat it by the film's end, but then he is killed, and it turns out it wasn't Harold, so okay. Then there is a final scene showing Harold moving into a more upscale neighborhood, but it's played during the credits. I assume because they remembered they didn't really resolve Harold's story arc, but also didn't know where else to put it. When the credits scene played, I literally was like, oh yeah, that guy, seeing as he was missing from the entire final act of the film. Now, the lackluster resolution of Harold's plot thread is bad, but it pales in comparison to the resolution in regard to the relationship between Dickie and Tony. So after deciding to cut ties with Tony, Dickie is convinced by Sil that he is the only shot Tony has to avoid a life of crime. Dickie then tells Sil to tell Tony he will meet him at Holston's the next day, ostensibly to patch things up. However, that night, Dickie is killed. At Dickie's funeral, Tony metaphorically makes a promise to Dickie via the pinky swear, which was a callback to an earlier scene, implying that Tony plans to honor Dickie by following in his footsteps, which is how we get Tony entering the world of organized crime. However, this makes absolutely no fucking sense. If you recall the scene between Dickie and young Tony, the pinky swear was in the context of Tony promising Dickie that he would stay out of trouble. But in the final scene, the pinky swear seems to imply that Tony wants to honor Dickie by pursuing organized crime. If Tony wanted to honor Dickie, wouldn't it have made more sense for him to not do so, which is what Dickie has been urging him to do ever since he was a kid? But actually, then again, maybe not. As I said, we didn't really get all that much development between Tony and Dickie throughout the film, which in turn results in the film hyper-focusing on their relationship in the final act feel jarring and forced. I get the film really wanted us to buy that Dickie's death leads to Tony deciding to honor him by pursuing a life of crime, but this seemingly goes against everything that was established throughout the entire film. I understand that the writers really wanted to set up a situation where it was Dickie's influence that ends up sending Tony down his inevitable path, since it alludes to the tragic irony of Dickie basically sealing the fate of his own son decades in the future. But it never lands. I fully comprehend that the film is insisting that Dickie is the one who quote-unquote made Tony Soprano, and that is what we the audience are supposed to take away from the ending, but it didn't earn this, which in turn ends up being the biggest failure of the film. On a smaller scale, there are a number of aspects of the film that just seem random or tacked on, as if the writers had a bunch of different ideas for what they wanted the prequel to be and just jumbled them all together. Dickie's relationship with Josephina, by and large, didn't add much to the film, it seemingly only serving as a plot device to set up her affair with Harold, which in retrospect was also super random and only seemed to happen to facilitate her murder. Most of the scenes between Livia and Tony seem out of place. There is a nice scene where Livia meets with Tony's guidance counselor, showing that she at one point did express love for her son. But again, this doesn't really factor into anything. It could be completely removed and it wouldn't change a thing. Then there is the whole micro subplot with Tony trying to get some medication for his mother, which once again goes nowhere. Christopher narrating the tale from beyond the grave also seemed like a strange choice, especially considering how it only happened sparingly, and I wasn't even really sure what the point of it was from a thematic standpoint. Again, it kind of feels like a bunch of different ideas and drafts of the script were kind of just smushed together, and yeah, it just feels really uneven and disconnected and just not really, it doesn't really feel like a coherent vision. For the most part, I thought the film did a good job of not relying too much on fan service, but a couple of scenes really stuck out to me. Namely, baby Christopher crying when he sees Tony, alluding to Christopher's eventual fate, and the scene where Johnny puts a bullet through Livia's beehive hairdo. Both felt like a little bit too much of an on-the-nose wink to fans of the series. However, perhaps the biggest disappointment I had with the film, aside from Dickie and Tony's relationship being underdeveloped, is the revelation in regard to Dickie's murder. For those who have watched the show, you will know that in season 4, Tony tells Christopher that Dickie was killed by a police detective by the name of Barry Haydu. Christopher ends up confronting Haydu, who denies complicity in Dickie's death. Despite this, Christopher ends up killing him. While this seems pretty cut and dry, many fans will attest that all may not be as it seems. First of all, Tony states in the episode that he was aware of Haydu's murder of Dickie, but they didn't move on him because he was a valuable informant. Personally, this seems utterly ridiculous. Whether or not Dickie was a made guy at the time of his death, it seems absolutely insane to think that Tony, or anyone else for that matter, would not only let the man who killed him walk the streets, but work with him for decades. Also, there is the question as to how the hell did Tony even find out about Haydu's involvement in Dickie's death if it is in fact true. One of the more popular theories is that Tony actually has no clue who killed Dickie, and simply told Christopher it was Haydu because he needed to get rid of Haydu and/or get Christopher back on his side. Note that Christopher's murder of Haydu takes place in the season 4 premiere. The end of season 3 saw a rift forming between Tony and Christopher as a result of Tony's handling of the Jackie, out of respect for my father, April Jr. situation. Tony delivering Dickie's quote-unquote killer to Christopher was not only an attempt to repair their relationship, but to make Christopher feel as if he is indebted to him. However, again, it isn't really made clear. Maybe Tony is lying, or maybe he was lied to by others about who really killed Dickie. Or maybe everything Tony said is true and Haydu really did kill Dickie. The scene itself is left purposely vague, with even Chris saying it doesn't really matter whether or not Haydu killed Dickie since Tony wants him dead either way. In any case, who truly killed Dickie Moltisanti is not conclusively confirmed. So, naturally, after learning that the prequel film would focus primarily on Dickie's character, many of us fans were excited to possibly get confirmation as to how his death went down. And as it turns out, it wasn't Haydu after all. Well, maybe it was. The shooter isn't identified in the film, and I tried combing through the IMDb cast list for any clues, but came up empty as to whether or not this was supposed to be Haydu. If you have any insider info on this, let me know in the comments. But in any case, it turns out Dickie was not killed out of revenge for taking out Jilly Ruffalo's eye, as Tony tells Christopher in the series. The hit was put out by Uncle Jr., because Dickie laughed at him when he fell, made a joke implying he was gay once, and was pissed when Johnny chewed him out by comparing him to Dickie. Okay, maybe the point of this was to deconstruct the legend of Dickie's death. Instead of it having been out of retribution for Dickie tearing out a man's eye, it was just some petty bullshit. While I suppose this is true to the series, as a lot of the show's conflict was indeed brought about by petty bullshit, it just felt hollow. It doesn't feel as if Junior being the one who put the hit on Dickie holds any sort of thematic weight, nor does it put anything in the series in a different light. It just feels rather arbitrary. They didn't want to just have it be Haydu Haydu and they needed to have it be someone else, and they just kind of, hey, why not Junior? Even though I don't think Junior ever even mentions Dickie in the series. So yeah, like why not have Johnny put out the hit out of fear that Dickie would usurp him as Tony's father figure? Why not have Harold kill him to bring their conflict to a resolution? Why not just have it be carried out by some random thug who just really wanted those fucking sweet TV trays? Even if the film simply confirmed that Dickie was killed by Haydu, like that's fine. Like I honestly wasn't expecting some massive twist or anything, rather just a clarification. But unfortunately, the decision to have Junior be the one who is responsible seems like the most uninteresting and thematically weak option. I know I went in on the film pretty hard, but that isn't to say I didn't think there were good things about it. Alessandro Nivolla's performance as Dickie Moltisanti was absolutely phenomenal. From how he is spoken of in the series, I initially pictured him as a vicious and ruthless criminal, but instead, the film portrays him as much more of a conflicted individual. The tragic irony of seeing a man who seemed like he had it in him to turn over a new leaf, remembered only as a ruthless gangster, is quite fitting to the themes of the series. On that note, the performances were all around pretty solid. Vera Farmiga as Livia was a particular standout, despite her limited screen time. She didn't go too overboard to the point where she became a caricature, but her performance nonetheless absolutely rings true to the Livia she is meant to become a few decades down the line. Leslie Odom Jr. is excellent as always, Michaela De Rossi was fantastic, Ray Liotta shows he still got it, and then there is of course Michael Gandolfini in his late father's legendary role. Initially I actually thought he was trying a bit too hard to emulate older Tony, but upon my second watch, I actually think this is quite fitting, since young Tony is in a point in his life where he is sort of trying to emulate those around him and form his own identity. So it makes sense that his tough guy routine comes off as a bit surface level. William Ludwig as Mini Tony also did a really nice job. But overall, despite my reservations against and skepticism about prequels in general, I was excited for the film for the sole reason that it sought to fill in the missing piece as to how Tony went from a bright young kid with aspirations of a life outside of the Newark streets to a man who would go on to be one of the most monstrous characters in television history. If the film had failed in every other aspect, I personally might have given it a pass if it had stuck the landing on this one thing. But not only did I not get any more clarification as to how this came about, I actually think the film leads to more confusion in regard to how Dickie's influence led to Tony deciding to pursue the life of a mobster, thus making the film, aside from being an overcluttered and meandering affair, quite simply utterly pointless.